The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised. Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, everybody.
Well, we hope you all had a happy New Year's and it was safe and fun.
Especially fun.
Yeah, we had a great New Year's.
We did.
It was just the two of us.
Yes, but we still had all of our Christmas lights up, so it was nice and cozy in the living room, and we had a couple drinks and listened to the Ghost Radio app and
yeah, that we did.
The singular random words that it spit out at us.
And we listened to some old Art Bell stories.
We did. Yeah, it was a good night.
It was. It was a great way to ring in the new year. And with that said, we'd like to thank each and every one of you listeners out there, both old and new. 2024 was really good to us. So here's to 2025.
Woohoo!
Wow. So for our first episode of the new year, we've got something pretty cool lined up for all of you.
Yes, it's my favorite topic of all topics.
A rebirth of such.
Yes.
Why don't you get us started?
All right. So, as Wes already said, we've made it through the first week or so of January, and with a new year comes all kinds of new hopes and new goals, and for many, New Year's resolutions. Something about the new year just instinctively drives people to seek new opportunities or to derive new ways to better themselves, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. Breaking a bad habit or putting away money for a vacation or a new home, or even signing up for a class to learn something new, or joining a group of like-minded people. Those are all good things. Studies show that 49% of Americans between the ages of 18 and 29 make New Year's resolutions. 31% of people between the ages of 30 and 49 do. But the percentage drops dramatically once people reach age 50 and older, just 21%. Now, maybe that's because they achieved their goals and are enjoying the fruits of their labor. Or maybe that's because they know that 88% of all New Year's resolution makers break their resolutions within the first 2 weeks of making them.
Well, I've never been big on resolutions. I figure if you want to work on something, you should be doing it all year round.
Yeah. Well, I never made resolutions, but I always made goals for myself, which were different.
Right.
Like I framed them differently. I think a lot of people make resolutions where they're going to stop doing something rather than making goals of things that they are going to do.
You know what I think the new year really represents, at least for me, is that all the holidays are over with. That whole stretch of Halloween, then Thanksgiving, then Christmas. January is kind of a recovery period where you're trying to bank some money now from all the money spent on Christmas. And you're trying to relax from all the holidays because it gets pretty hectic and stressful.
And it still is a renewal of sorts, January.
Yeah, in January, well, there's nothing going on. It's time to kick back and just enjoy that it's over with.
Right.
And start over and do it all again next year.
Yeah. Well, I would argue that without a doubt, January is a month of new beginnings. And so I thought it'd be a perfect time to circle back to a topic that we've covered before, especially since it fits right in with the idea of starting over, but starting over in a different kind of way.
You're going to like this. It's amazing. We've got a couple great stories for you tonight.
According to the University of Virginia's School of Medicine website, in the last 50 years, the Division of Perceptual Studies has collected over 2,500 reincarnation cases. Most of these occurred outside of the U.S., which kind of makes sense since only 20% of Americans believe in it, although when I read that, I felt like the statistic was a little low. Whereas in countries that are predominantly Hindu or Buddhist, the percentage rises to 44. Most of the 2,500 case studies involve very young children, which, for me, makes their stories even more credible. According to the website, children who may be experiencing a past life might say things like, "You're not my mommy or daddy," or "I had another mommy and daddy," or "When I was big, I used to work downtown," or "That happened before I was in mommy's tummy," or "I died when I fell," or "I remember when I lived in that other house." Hearing any of that coming out of your 2 or 3-year-old's mouth has got to be unnerving, especially when it seems to come apropos of nothing. At first, it might be easier just to shrug it off or even laugh it off as this weird thing your child once said. But when they start sharing even more specific details, it can be downright eerie. Which is exactly how Australian singer, actor, and TV personality David Campbell explained it in a 2019 Stellar magazine column. The award-winning actor and co-host of Today Extra in Australia started off the article by saying it was the weirdest thing he'd ever shared about his personal life, but he was looking for answers. According to the New Zealand Herald.com, Campbell and his wife Lisa have 3 children, and when their son Billy was 2.5 years old, he looked at a card his mother was holding and said, "Look, it's me, when I was a princess." The card was a picture of Princess Diana. For our younger listeners, in case you've heard of Princess Diana, but you might not know the details, Lady Diana Spencer was King Charles's first wife and the mother of Princes William and Harry. She shocked the royal world in 1992 when she separated from Charles, and then again in August of 1996 when they officially divorced. Diana and her companion, Dodi Fayed, were killed in a horrific car crash inside a Paris tunnel a year and 3 days later in 1997. Conspiracy theories instantly swirled, especially since Dodi Fayed was an Egyptian film producer and heir to the Harrods of London department store fortune. Harrods, for those of you who may never have heard of it, is an iconic luxury store that opened in London in 1849. And I have to say, I did go there once, and I felt like I could barely afford to walk in the door. But I also remember watching Charles and Diana's wedding on TV in 1981, and thinking it was the most fairy tale-like thing I had ever seen, but granted, I was also 6 years old at the time. At first, the Campbells laughed off Billy's comment as just something silly their son had said. 6 months went by. And then one day, Campbell overheard his now 3-year-old son talking to himself about his 2 boys. Intrigued, Campbell asked Billy what he meant, and Billy replied that he had 2 sons. Their names? William and Harry. At this point, both Campbell and his wife began to ask more questions, and Billy claimed that he once had siblings, including a brother named John. Now, Campbell and his wife knew that Lady Diana Spencer had 3 siblings, Jane, Sarah, and Charles, and so they initially brushed off Billy's comment. But when Lisa did a little research, she discovered that Diana had had a brother named John, who died hours after he was born in 1960. According to the Mirror, as Billy got a little older, he began to describe Balmoral Castle in great detail to a Scottish family friend. Balmoral Castle has been a British royal family estate since 1852, when Prince Albert and Queen Victoria purchased it. It was one of Queen Elizabeth's favorite places. In fact, Queen Elizabeth passed away there in 2022. But years before that, when Billy was describing it to the family friend, he had never been there and he had never seen it. Why would he? He was just a 4-year-old little boy in Australia. Campbell said, quote, "He claimed when he was Princess Diana, he used to go to a castle in that kilted wonderland. He described the castle as having unicorns on it, and it was called Balmoral. The unicorn is the national animal of Scotland, and there are unicorns on the walls. How does he know this?" End quote. And then Campbell claimed that when his wife Lisa showed Billy another picture of Diana, the little boy said, quote, "There's me as a princess. Then one day the sirens came, and I wasn't a princess anymore." End quote. How chilling is that, right? Campbell wondered in the article if Billy, who was 4 at the time, would outgrow his memories of his past life. And now that he's 10, it's unknown whether he has or not, since nothing has been publicly shared by Campbell since that 2019 article. And skeptics of these past life stories will always say something like, how come everybody who claims to be reincarnated was once somebody famous? Well, it may seem like the case, at least when it comes to adults. It is a little harder to believe a 40-year-old woman who suddenly starts claiming to have once been Marie Antoinette and Marilyn Monroe, because they've had an entire lifetime to study up on historical figures. But when it comes to children, I find that totally credible, and many of them do not claim to have once been someone famous, like Luke Ruhlman. According to Fox2Now.com, Erica Ruhlman noticed that her son Luke seemed overly concerned about safety and keeping people safe in their Cincinnati home when he was just 2. And she also noticed that he liked to name things, like stuffed animals or various toys, and even a ladybug he once caught, with the same name, Pam. Erica asked him once why he named the ladybug Pam, and Luke said that he just liked the name. Erica shrugged it off, although at the same time, she thought it was kind of strange since they didn't know anybody with that name. So she couldn't figure out where he'd first heard it. Then, according to a Channel 7 news article, Luke began to make comments. Now, keep in mind, he was still only about 3 years old. And he'd say things like, when he was a girl, he had black hair. Or he'd see a pair of earrings and he'd say, he used to have a pair just like them when he was a girl. Finally, one day, Erica got up the courage to ask her toddler who Pam was. And Luke turned to look at her as he nonchalantly said, quote, "Well, I was." When his mother asked what he meant, Luke said, quote, "Well, I used to be, but I died, and I went up to heaven, and I saw God, and eventually God pushed me back down. When I woke up, I was a baby, and you named me Luke." End quote. Over the next year or so, Luke added to his story, saying he remembered living in a tall building and walking a lot, but also taking the train in the city he lived in, Chicago. Luke, of course, had never been to Chicago. Luke also developed a keen love for Stevie Wonder music and playing around on a keyboard. Erica continued to ask questions from time to time, and each time Luke would insist that he was a woman named Pam who lived in Chicago. Eventually, Erica asked a difficult question: if Luke remembered how he had died. His answer was just as chilling as Billy Campbell's. Luke said, "Yeah, it was a fire." And then he made a motion with his hand as if he was jumping out of a building. Sufficiently spooked, Erica decided to scour the internet, and she made a terrible discovery: the Paxton Hotel fire of 1993. Chicago's Paxton Hotel was a 4-story residential hotel in the Old Town district. Since it was classified as a single-room occupancy building and not an actual hotel, it did not have an alarm system or a sprinkler system. And during recent renovations, the fire doors had been removed and not replaced. Now, the articles that I read about the fire were really, really, really bad, like really disturbing. So in a nutshell, at first, the firefighters couldn't even fight the actual fire because so many people were crammed against the windows begging to be rescued that they needed to rescue the people first before they could fight the flames. Several of the windows had iron bars across them to deter break-ins, so people were trapped until the bars could be taken off. 19 people died in the fire, including some who jumped from the higher stories in a sheer desperate attempt to escape. One of those people was Pamela Robinson. Chilled through, Erica decided she needed to ask her son another question. Since Old Town was predominantly a black neighborhood, she asked him, "Luke, what color was Pam's skin?" Luke, who is white, looked at her with a duh expression on his face and said, "Black." The New York Post reported that Luke and his parents appeared on an episode of the Lifetime Movie Network's TV series, Ghost Inside My Child, when Luke was 5 years old. During filming, Luke was shown a large page of random pictures of black women in their 30s. As Luke looked at the pictures, he said, quote, "Well, I don't recognize anybody, but I remember when this one was taken." and he pointed to the picture of Pam Robinson. Now, could he have been coached? Of course. But after the show, Erica felt compelled to contact Pam Robinson's family. The family had refused to be part of the show itself, but had offered their contact info if Erica wanted to reach out. She was able to speak to Pam's sister, who shared that Pam loved Stevie Wonder music and playing the keyboard. It was shortly after Erica connected with Pam's sister and was finally learning about the young woman's life before she died that Luke slowly began to remember less and less about his past life. Erica said in the Fox article, quote, "It was like he got it out. He was finished and had nothing more to say about it." End quote. And that seems to be how a lot of these past life memories go. It's as if the soul of the person who was tragically lost needs to be remembered, and then they move on, allowing the child to build his or her own memories. But sometimes those memories don't fade and carry on into adulthood, like the case of Jenny Cockle, which Wes will get into right after this quick break. Hey, did you know there's actually a human gravesite on the moon? In 1999, NASA's Lunar Prospector science craft crashed into a moon crater going 3,800 miles per hour. This outer space collision was on purpose because along for the ride was a vial containing 1 ounce of human ashes belonging to astronomer Eugene Shoemaker. Shoemaker, who was an expert on outer space collisions, was best known for co-discovering the comet Shoemaker-Levy 9, which crashed spectacularly into Jupiter. His colleagues at NASA thought crashing his remains on the moon would be a great way to honor him. Who'da thunk it?
All right, we're back. And as Beth had said before the break, sometimes when a child has had past life memories, they don't always fade away. They actually grow stronger into adulthood, which was the case for Jenny Cockle. According to the Sci Encyclopedia website, Jenny was born in Barnet, Hertfordshire, England in 1953. At the age of 3, Jenny began having vivid dreams about a woman in a hospital bed. In her dream, Jenny floated about 10 feet above the woman and watched as a nurse came in and out of the room and a man that was kneeling by the bedside. With the limited vocabulary of a 3-year-old, all Jenny could really tell her mom at that time was that she felt awful about dying and abandoning her children. As she grew older and her vocabulary expanded, she realized that the man kneeling by the hospital bedside in her dream was a priest administering last rites. She also described feeling as though her consciousness had been thrust out of her body and sucked upwards from behind into a long, narrow tube. Next, she saw a bright light. When Jenny was 6 years old, she had a doll whose eyes could change color from blue to brown. Jenny named the doll Elizabeth and made sure the doll's eyes were always blue. A year later, at age 7, Jenny began drawing very detailed maps of both a hamlet and a village. The maps included street names, specific houses and buildings, and natural landscape features. The maps, which she continued to draw until she was 10 years old, didn't correspond to anywhere Jenny had ever been. But she knew it was a real place, so one day at school, she grabbed an atlas, opened it up to a map of Ireland, closed her eyes, and let all her memories flood through her. When she opened her eyes, she was staring at the town of Malahide, north of Dublin. She also insisted on dressing up every Sunday, even though her family did not go to church. At the age of 15, Jenny picked up the hobby of flute making, which she made out of bamboo, and gave away to her friends as gifts. By this time, Jenny's past life memories were coming to her even while she was awake. She was convinced that she had once been an Irish woman named Mary, who had given birth to 8 children before dying at a young age. She could describe Mary's house perfectly. A little single-story buff stone cottage with a solid wood door and a sagging slate roof. Behind the house was a vegetable garden and then woods. There were other houses nearby, as well as a boggy meadow and a stream. The one thing she remembered most about the inside of the cottage was the dark and tiny kitchen, where she made round, flat loaves of bread on an old-fashioned range. The maps of the village she had drawn when she was younger started to take shape in her mind. Jenny could recall the main shopping street that ran north to south, the church where she and her many children went to services, and a railway station that was just off the main road. Although Jenny felt that Mary had never been on a train, she did feel that Mary was fascinated by steam engines. Jenny had especially strong memories of her children. Now, keep in mind, Jenny was barely a teenager. There was a confident and straightforward older boy, a patient and helpful older girl, and then 2 energetic young boys and a blue-eyed blonde little girl. As for her husband, Jenny's memories weren't as specific. She sensed that perhaps he had been a soldier, but that he was also a bit of an outsider. His job had something to do with roofing, but that was all. She felt as though he rarely was ever around and was rather unfriendly when he was, and she felt that money was often a worry. Jenny couldn't actually see herself as Mary, so she had no idea what Mary actually looked like, but she was able to see what Mary once wore. So it was as if she inhabited Mary's body in these past life visions, but had no access to a mirror. She said that, as Mary, she wore a blouse that was gathered into a band just below her elbow and a long dark skirt. More than anything, though, Jenny said she often was overwhelmed with the incredible guilt for leaving her children. She had 2 distinct memories of the children, although she didn't know until later that one of them was about her kids. In the first, she recalled the children showing her a rabbit they had caught in a trap and how she had reacted when she realized that the poor rabbit was still alive. In the second, she was standing on the jetty in the wind, waiting for a boat to arrive. By the late 1980s, Jenny was married and had a child of her own, and this inspired her to try and find Mary's family. First, she contacted a bookseller in Malahide and asked for a copy of a more detailed map of the town. When it arrived, the map wasn't an exact match to Jenny's childhood maps, but it was darn close. And in Malahide was Gay Brook and Swords Road, just like on her hand-drawn map. And so in 1989, Jenny went to Malahide. Seeing the church St. Andrew's filled her with overwhelming relief. Her memories were real. And if her memories were real, perhaps she could be reunited with her children. Jenny went back home to England even more determined, and was able to contact a landlord in Malahide who said one of his little cottages had once been inhabited by several children. Their mother, Miss Sutton, had died at the age of 36 in the 1930s. Her husband had been a soldier in World War I, and after her death, their children were sent to orphanages. Jenny immediately reached out to anyone with the surname Sutton in the Malahide area, as well as the nearby orphanages. Eventually, she received a letter from a priest in Dublin, who had looked at the orphanage's records and found 6 of the Sutton children's baptism records. But she also received a copy of the death certificate for Miss Sutton. Mary Sutton of Gaybrook, Malahide, had passed away in 1932 of toxemia, septic pneumonia, and gangrene. She was just 36 years old. What Jenny didn't know, at least not yet, was that Mary's 8 children were named Sonny, John, Frank, Philomena, Mary, Bridget, and Elizabeth. Mary's husband was abusive and spent the money he made as a scaffolder on alcohol. Mary had struggled to make ends meet by growing her own vegetables and trapping her own animals. When she passed away, her husband was deemed unfit to care for the 6 youngest children, and they were all sent to orphanages. Sonny went to live with his father. At this point, Jenny published a letter in the Dublin Evening Press, asking for help in finding Mary Sutton's children. Eventually, she was on the phone with one of Mary Sutton's grandchildren. The woman confirmed that her father, John, was mischievous. He was one of the 2 younger boys Jenny remembered, and that the 2 other brothers, Frank and Sonny, were still alive. The boys had been reunited, but they had lost track of their sisters, including their little blue-eyed sister, Elizabeth. Remember the doll that I mentioned at the beginning of my story? The blue-eyed one that Jenny had named Elizabeth? John and Sonny Sutton confirmed that they had lived in a little stone cottage and that the roof had sagged. They'd had a vegetable garden, and their mother had cooked on a range exactly like Jenny described. And Sonny was shocked that Jenny knew about the rabbit that they had once caught in a trap. He also explained her memory of standing on the jetty waiting for a boat. He said that as a teenager, he had a part-time job caddying for a golf club on a nearby island, and every evening his mother would wait on the jetty for him to return to Malahide. Sonny and Frank were completely fascinated by the idea that this young woman was their mother reincarnated. John wasn't as convinced, but Jenny was able to find their sister Elizabeth and reunite them before tracking down the older sister, Philomena, and reunite them as well. In the 1990s, before the old cottage was demolished, Jenny Cockle met with all of her children one last time. She published a book about her past life experience, Yesterday's Children, in 1993. There was also a film adaptation that was made in 2000, starring Jane Seymour. Jenny Cockle's story is fascinating, just like Billy's and Luke's. So, what exactly do these past life stories say about the soul and consciousness after death? Now, as you all know, scientists really don't have any answers to this, but at least they're looking at it and there are debates about it.
Very passionate debates, actually.
Well, there should be.
Yeah, because there's the whole group that believe that consciousness resides in the brain, and then there's the whole group that believes that it resides outside of the brain, and neither one can definitively prove it.
Not at this point. It'll probably be eons from now.
Right, which is why these reincarnation stories are so fascinating to me, because they are very young children. And I think it's really interesting. I think it was Luke's mother, I had said, who, after she started to learn something about Pam's family, it was like Pam realized that she wasn't going to be forgotten, and then she kind of went on her way. And then Luke was able to kind of let her go and then create his own memories.
Right.
And I think that's the case with a lot of them as they get to a certain age and they don't have these memories as often because whatever the spirit is or the soul is, they feel like they've been heard and recognized and they move on.
Well, it could very well be. It's a lot like near-death experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Your consciousness is outside your body.
Right.
I believe that your spirit still lives on. Your consciousness is still out there.
Right. So we would be proponents of it resides outside the brain because there's no other way to explain it.
Exactly. It just makes sense, whether we can prove it or not.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, you think about ghosts, too. They are consciousness outside of the brain that doesn't have a human physical body.
Exactly. I don't know. I just love thinking about it.
I know. It's a lot to think about.
I mean, I'm by no means ready to find out for myself.
No, let's not hope for that. No.
But I think someday down the line, we will figure this out.
Maybe not in our lifetime.
Well, no, not in our lifetime. But with more technology.
Or less.
Perhaps so.
Right?
Well, that about does it for this episode. We hope to see you all next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment on your favorite listening platform. It really helps us move up the list and become more visible on the podcast charts so new people can find us.
And thank you all for your continued support.
See you next week for an all-new episode.